You take a lot of pride in your Illinois roots growing up in Urbana. Tell me a bit about how that shaped the person you've become over the years.
Well, I was born in Urbana, not in Champaign, because there's a difference. A lot of rivalry in the Twin Cities. My dad was an electrician at the University of Illinois. My mother was a bookkeeper with a small loan office in downtown Urbana. I went to local schools, St. Mary's Grade School, Urbana High School, and the University of Illinois, which really was the key experience of my life, because it was at the U of I that I don't know, I just kind of had my start in life, including being editor of the Daily Illini and being launched into the wider world.
You, very early in life, started writing. You worked for the Champaign News Gazette.
I wanted to be a newspaper man almost from the beginning. My best friend who lived across the street, Hal Holmes, his father was city editor of the News Gazette and took us on a tour of the office. And they gave me my byline set in a piece of lead, so you could use a stamp pad and say, by Roger Ebert. And I thought, boy, that's for me. I want to be a newspaper reporter. So I wrote for the grade school paper. I produced a neighborhood newspaper. And, of course, I worked for the News Gazette starting as a junior in high school.
What was the first story you remember covering?
The first story I covered, a big story, I went over to the Illini Union to interview Estes Kefauver, who was the vice presidential candidate, and I wrote that up for the Urbana High School Echo. That would have been in 1956 when I was a freshman in high school.
You take a lot of pride in the kind of values your dad imbued upon you. I've heard the story about how he ran all the lights at the University of Illinois.
Oh, yeah. I'll never forget that, it'd be summertime, and there'd be a big electrical storm, and the lights would go out at the university, which had its own power plant. And the phone would ring, and it'd be for my dad, and he would wake me up, come along with me, and we'd get in the old Plymouth and drive across town to the power plant. And he would go inside, and then he would say, stand by the door, Roger. And I would stand by the door, and he would say, you watching? And I would say, yes. And he would turn on the lights. And all the lights on the campus would come back on. And then we would go home again. And I just thought, boy, that's terrific. He was a working man, a Democrat, blue collar, a union member, also kind of an intellectual. He read a lot. He was very interested in current events. We were always watching the talk shows on Sunday morning and listening to the commentators on the radio. And he and my mother were very, very supportive of me as a young journalist. They allowed me to stay out all night, 2 nights a week, to work for the News Gazette. I had to have a special work permit and some kind of a pass because of the curfew, and they supported that because they could tell that I wanted to be a writer, and that was fine with them.
I got the impression that they never wanted to put any limits on you.
They never did. They never did. And they were very proud of me. And, I really have nothing to complain about in terms of my childhood and my adolescence. I had a lot of good luck.
Fast forward now to the time when you went to work for the Chicago Sun-Times, 1966, am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
That's still quite a leap from Champaign to the big city.
I had done some writing for the Chicago newspapers. I did book reviews and feature pieces for the Saturday entertainment section of the Chicago Daily News, and I applied to the Daily News for a job, and my letter wound up at the Sun-Times, and Jim Hogue, who was then the managing editor, or perhaps the city editor, called me in and hired me. And so I went to work at the paper in the fall of '66, and on April the 1st of '67, I became the film critic. My predecessor retired. The feature editor gave me the job. So I lucked out into my entire career. I mean, people say, how do you get to be a movie critic? And I guess my answer would be, I have no idea. With me, it was good luck. Right place, right time.
Tell me about your love of films. When did that start?
I started going to the movies as a kid in Champaign-Urbana. I went to the Princess Theater on Main Street for the matinee double feature every Saturday. My Aunt Martha would take me to the movies over in the big palaces in Champaign. And then in high school, I started going to the art theater, which showed movies like Citizen Kane. I saw that for the first time. Movies by Fellini, Bergman, the Angry Young Men from Britain, Cassavetes, and the other American independents. And then, of course, in college, They had a film society both for domestic films and an international series. So by the time I got out of college, I had seen a lot of movies.
Is there a particular trick to writing a good movie review? When you sit down and watch a movie, how are you watching it perhaps differently or the same as any one of us?
Well, you just take whoever you are and whatever you know into the theater with you, and you look at the movie, and whatever you think about is what you write about. I think the important thing is that the review has to be first person. You are the person writing the review. It's your opinion. You are not stating some kind of objective truth. And I'm amused sometimes when people will write me and say that I should be a more objective critic, because objectivity and criticism have nothing to do with each other. It's all subjective. It's all first-person opinion.
Do you have a sense of how many reviews you've written over the years?
I think I've written about 5,500 or 6,000 reviews. And I've seen, of course, a lot more movies than that, but that's about how many reviews I've written for the Sun-Times.
And you watch all sorts of different genres. Do you have a particular favorite, though?
I like film noir, both classic and modern. And I like slice of life, very carefully observed sorts of quirky films about how strange people are.
You like character-driven films.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What kind of character intrigues you the most?
What kind of character intrigues me the most? I think actually coming-of-age movies are often fascinating. How people got to be where they are, what formed them. And when I say that, you might think I'm thinking of, I don't know, Huckleberry Finn, but it would also include, for example, Goodfellas, the Scorsese movie, or for that matter, Mean Streets. Those are both coming-of-age movies. So that you can have a very good movie that's a coming-of-age film.
The lead character may not always be terribly sympathetic, but it's
that's right.
Going
yeah. Where do they start, and where do they end up, and how did it happen?
As your career grew, you took your film reviews over to television at Channel 11 WTTW. How was that a departure for the typical film critic?
Well, we were asked, Gene Siskel and I, to do a movie review show. And I think we were both kind of hesitant because we had a rivalry. He was at the Tribune, I was at the Sun-Times. And we didn't have a real warm relationship. And that was true from day one, and it continued for almost 25 years, a real rivalry that took place for many years in this very balcony. And at the same time, I think we respected each other, and we both knew what we were talking about. The important thing about that show, and it still continues as Ebert and Roper, is that it's not about gossip. It's not about who's in rehab, who's getting divorced, what did they wear to the premiere. It's about movies. And we look at all kinds of movies, not just Planet of the Apes, but also documentaries, foreign films, independent films, revivals, real good movies that happen to be playing on cable or on television, so that it's really the only national coverage in the entire spectrum of American television that's serious about the movies.
And yet there's a chemistry there between the two of you, and it continues to this day. Two very opinionated people who are telling you what they think about this.
That's right. And after Gene's death, we looked a long time for different. We had about 30 different guest hosts, and we settled on Richard Roper, who coincidentally works at the Sun-Times just as I do. And some people thought, well, that's a setup of some sort, but actually he was almost disqualified because he worked for the same paper. But he was very articulate, very able to defend himself, very quick on his feet, and good for the show.
Tell me about Gene Siskel, someone who over the years you grew very close to.
Gene was very smart. He also had very high standards. He didn't compromise easily. He had a funny sense of humor, which not everybody picked up on, although he could be very funny on the air. And he was very competitive, so that he and I were constantly competing. Who's going to be better on television? Who's going to make the better argument? Who's going to be right? Who's going to be wrong? Who's going to be first? Who's going to be second? Who's going to get some interview for his newspaper, or who isn't? He kept me very much on the alert all during that time, because I was, in a way, it wasn't so much that I was trying to beat the world, I was trying to beat Gene.
You were always raising the bar on each other, it looked like, over the years.
Yeah, I think we were. Our competition made us both work a lot harder. If this had been a one-paper town with either one of us working all by himself, wouldn't have been the same.
Isn't it a bit ironic with the film industry so heavily located in Hollywood on the West Coast that the leading program on film criticism is coming out of the Midwest?
Oh, that was very strange, and I think to this day there are people in New York and Los Angeles who don't understand why this show comes out of Chicago. And you know, as we moved on, we left shows behind that were staffed with other people. So at one point, sneak previews at the movies and Siskel and Ebert were all three being made in Chicago. And the other four critics had to fly in every week, 2 from the East Coast, 2 from the West Coast. I'm sure that every time they got on the plane, they thought, why do I have to go to Chicago to do this show?
Is there something about the Midwest and, if you will, the even-handedness of most of the people here that you think has something to do with it?
Well, you know, I think it was an advantage to us that we lived here in Chicago and didn't live on one of the coasts. We didn't meet the people all the time that we were writing about or talking about. We weren't part of the social scene. We weren't part of the premieres and the parties. We were here. We weren't there. And if you look at some of those entertainment shows on television, the people on them are just so starstruck and so thrilled to be part of the entertainment business that they don't have very much objectivity or very high standards when it comes to whether or not what they're covering is junk.
Films have changed over the years since you started reviewing them. We're seeing so much more in the way of the high technology and the digital effects and everything. How do you feel about the way that the technology may be driving some of the business?
Well, you know, technology is getting better, and you now have computer-generated imagery that can give you amazing sights in movies like Jurassic Park or the Star Wars pictures. But special effects have been there right from the beginning. Some of the first films made, like A Voyage to the Moon, was all special effects. And people don't realize that about 60% of all the shots in Citizen Kane use a special effect of one sort or another. King Kong, a total special effects picture. All kinds of tricks were used to fool the eye and fool the audience right from the start. And so the special effects may be getting better, but I don't think they're any more important than they always were.
The story must drive everything.
Yes, the story is very important in most movies. Some movies now are just, you know, kind of like meandering trips through life or kind of the whole passage of time is the point. But in general, I think we go because we get involved in the story. We identify with the characters on the screen and we care about what's going to happen to them.
I was just reading your review on, it was a reprint of the review on Hoop Dreams with Steve James. Those were in a documentary with people you really came to care about.
Yes. One thing that I've always done, and we on the show have always done, is pay a lot of attention to documentary films. I don't know why it is that so many moviegoers seem to be shy about going to a documentary. Oh, I don't know if I want to see that or not. And if you can get them into the theater to see some of these amazing documentaries of recent years, like Crumb, or My Brother's Keeper, or Paradise Lost, or Hoop Dreams, or Legacy, I could go on and on. They're amazed. They're amazed. They have a great time. These movies can be funny. They can be dramatic. There's a movie called American Movie about a kid up in Milwaukee who wants to make horror films. It's a documentary about him and about his filmmaking. That's one of the funniest movies I've ever seen in any genre at all. And people stay away from it. Oh, it's a documentary. I don't want to see it. They don't realize what a good time they're missing.
There's some real magic to be found in those. I didn't ask you earlier about the Pulitzer Prize, the only movie critic so far.
Yeah, I won the Pulitzer Prize in 1975. My paper submitted 10 examples of my work from the previous year. And that was a big day. That was a big day in my life. And I was very happy that day. Yeah.
Well, you have a very nice literary style to your pieces.
I was an English major, you know, all through college and even in graduate school and even a PhD candidate in English at the University of Chicago. And I read all the time. Not only do I read all the time, but I listen to audiobooks in the car. I think it actually helps you to think in colorful language if you hear it coming out of the radio as you're driving along instead of just listening to some disc jockey. And when I write, I try to write in a way that's very clear so that people can understand it, yet at the same time, I try not to write down. I think people are smart, they're engaged, they're alert, and they deserve the best writing that I'm capable of.
I know we have to watch your time.
Yeah, I was just about to say maybe like one more, I think.
I think so. That has to do with your film festival at Urbana.
Mm-hmm.
You like to make sure that a lot of the films that don't get the attention that they necessarily deserve get a moment in the sun.
Well, the University of Illinois asked me to do a film festival, and I thought, I'm a movie critic, so it's a conflict of interest for me to ask the studios for their new pictures. That would be wrong. But then I thought, as a critic, I see a lot of movies that I love that never get very much attention. Some of them don't even open. So why not have an overlooked film festival of overlooked films, or overlooked genres, or overlooked projection techniques? One year we showed Oklahoma, which is not an overlooked film, in 30 frame per second Todd A.O. vision, which nobody in the theater had ever seen before. So that has become one of the highlights of my life, that film festival. It is so much fun.
And finally, a final reflection upon the luck you've enjoyed to spend your life as one of the most noted film critics.
Well, you know, movies, it's been said that literature and drama and poetry hold up a mirror to humanity. The movies certainly do. And when we sit in a theater and look at the movies, it's like being able to eavesdrop on people's dreams. A very successful movie may be good, it may be bad, but it is certainly telling you something about the people who have gone to see it, that that's what they fear or what they hope for or what they care about. So to look at the movies is to know, in a way, what's going on around you in the world, to feel it.
Thank you very much.
Okay? Thanks.